Welcome to another episode of the Captain's Table. I am Mike Gotto. I'm a former California state lawmaker and congressional chief of staff, and I am your guest host today. And today we are very lucky to have as our guest Ambassador Dennis Ross. For almost 40 years, Mr. Ross has been deeply involved with the push for peace in the Middle East. He's been trusted by Democratic and Republican administrations. He was the U.S. point man on the peace process in both the George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton administrations. Ambassador Ross was instrumental in assisting Israelis and Palestinians to reach the 1995 interim agreement. He also successfully brokered the 1997 Hebron Accord, facilitated the 1994 Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty, and worked very intensively to bring Israel and Syria together. He's currently a distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute and remains very sought out for his insights on the Middle East, which is why we are so fortunate to have him here today. Ambassador Ross, welcome.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks. So, obviously the world is watching the current conflict quite a bit, and it's under more of a microscope than ever. Perhaps, that's one of the many things that social media has contributed to. There's obviously more social media than any of the conflicts in the region in the past. What has shocked you about some of the rhetoric and some of the public reactions of this conflict so far? Does anything strike you as different?
Yes. I mean, what has shocked me has been the kind of public outpouring in support of Hamas by some quarters, including in this country. I mean, I get, you want to see an end to Israeli occupation of Palestinians. I understand that. I can understand the reaction to how Israel is trying to defeat Hamas in Gaza. What I cannot understand is how anybody could defend Hamas and what they did. It's not just that their aim was to kill as many people as possible. It's also that there was this level of brutality that was, designed to dehumanize, not just kill, but dehumanize, designed to torture and not just kill, and to kill people of every age, including babies, and to torture them before they kill them. There was a level of human depravity that is almost incomprehensible, and then to have people supporting Hamas. I mean, they had a large banner at George Washington University and told us, "Glory to our martyrs," and they meant Hamas. It's just hard to fathom. And I've seen, the chants of "from the river to the sea," which means no Israel. It's interesting that the same people who accuse Israel of genocide are prepared to have a genocide against Israelis and the Jews. So that has shocked me.
Yeah, I have heard that from a number of people, and obviously as the interviewer, I'm supposed to be as unbiased as possible. But I must admit, it has been jarring for me too. I have tried to explore the different reasons why. I think Bill Maher has probably the best explanation of any when he says that so much of the world now mentally divides people into oppressed and oppressors. And if you are even the least bit strong, and obviously the modern state of Israel is strong, they mentally put you in this category of an oppressor, and unfairly, right?
But it's also, I think it's a very important insight, and I agree. I think Maher has been terrific on this, but there's still something that's missing, because look at Iran. They oppress their people. So why isn't there the same criticism of them? I mean, if it's oppressor and oppressed, why is it that there are those who oppress like the Russians, for example, that don't draw the same criticism from, from the people who are protesting here, or China, when it comes to, the Uyghurs.
Sure.
I mean, so it's a very selective view of oppressor and oppressed. I mean, you could say it's sort of tied to the global South view, and it's fundamentally critical of the U.S. and the West. And this is, again, the notion that white privilege and the like. But there is a remarkable dissonance here, where it's okay for some to oppress, and you give in other words, you give a pass to them, but those who fit your category of victimizer and victim, it produces this.
Yes.
But
And I believe,
go ahead.
I believe I believe some of it is indicative of a failure in our schools um, to teach basic history. I've been amazed when I speak with people who have some of those opinions, and there is a complete lack of historical context. There is a complete lack of historical knowledge. I am not Jewish. I should say that to our listeners. I am not Jewish. I did happen, though, to study ancient history. That's what my undergraduate degree is in. I studied at Berkeley and UCLA. And I get offended when people say things like Jews are not indigenous to the Middle East. That's offensive to me, and I'm not Jewish. It's offensive to me because I take issue when people don't know history. And it's offensive to me when people say that Jews have never been oppressed. You actually hear things like that today, and you can't even say that with a straight face. I mean, I'm snickering as I say that. But
Well,
I mean, tell me, I mean, do you think that there is perhaps a lack of basic historical knowledge from some of the people out there who are protesting in the streets for Hamas?
oh, for sure. No, I don't think they know any of the facts. What they want is their own reality, and they're really not interested in hearing what actually is reality. So it's much simpler to have a set of beliefs not rooted in fact, and it also allows you to retain a kind of purity. So you don't actually have to think about a conflict that might be characterized by complexity.
Right.
Now, I not only have I worked this issue for a long time, I teach it as well. And one of the things I say I do one class on the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and one of the things I say is that this is not a morality play where one side is all right and the other is all wrong. But for those who are out there, they don't want to be troubled by the facts. They don't want to be troubled by actually learning more about this. They want to be in a world that fits their kind of narrative that they have come to embrace, and anything that might question that, they will simply dismiss.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the different people out there and the different interests that have an interest in the Middle East. And I always like going through this thought exercise because I think it is helpful to for the average listener and the average person who might want to go to a protest or might be out there thinking something, posting something on social media. I always like to mentally separate those involved in Gaza, or for that matter on any issue, into the different groups. And here I conceptualize this as, there are the funders, there are entities like Iran, which benefit from chaos and frankly from warfare in the region. There are the leaders of Hamas, many which don't even live in Gaza. And they benefit from the strong emotions because it helps them stay in power. In their, some who are sitting in apartments in Doha, Qatar. There are the high military commanders who give the orders. There's the lower military personnel who conduct the attacks. And then there are people. There are the people who I roughly split in two. There are those who, were willing to go out in the street and support Hamas. And then there are the run-of-the-mill civilians. And there's a show called Yellowstone. There's a character named Rip Wheeler, and he had a saying that sums it up. He says, there's sharks and minnows in the world, and if you don't know which one you are, then you're not the shark. How are the minnows being manipulated right now in Gaza? How are they being manipulated uh, in Israel? How are they being manipulated all over the world?
Well, look, Hamas treats their own people as pawns. They use them as human shields. Uh, think about the fact that they have 300 miles of tunnels that they developed. And this is an impoverished area, right? This is a place where the per capita income is less than $2,000 a year. And the need for reconstruction is huge, even before this war. And they built 300 miles of tunnels, a warren of tunnels with all sorts of interconnections, meaning huge amounts of cement, steel, electrical wiring, copper, and wood were used to do this. Number one. So this was for the benefit of no one who's living above ground. Two, the tunnels are not for any of the Palestinians who live above ground. You would have thought maybe if you didn't treat your people as pawns and as human shields, you would allow them to come into the tunnels so they could be protected from the bombing. But no, none of the Palestinian public is permitted that. Only the Hamas fighters and leaders and their weapons. So there's a complete treatment of their own public as devices to be used, either as human shields or, in a sense, holding the whole population hostage, and treating them as people that they regard as would-be martyrs, even though their public doesn't seek to become martyrs. By the way, it's not so clear that the Palestinian leaders seek to become martyrs. They're quite happy to sacrifice others, but they're not so keen to become martyrs themselves. But this is an answer to your question. The sharks and the minnows, they treat their people not even as minnows. They treat their people as sheer pawns.
And that is what I try to express to people, at least give them some pause, which is, if you are being asked to go out there and protest any issue. Look, the political parties in the United States are fond of whipping up people into a frenzy before an election year because it helps turnout. This occurs all over the
Sure.
world, but in that region, it is particularly, I think, cynical and particularly detrimental because this is not just, protesting abortion to turn out votes. This is actually something that results in a terrorist group staying in power and in the long-term suppression of people. And I want to maybe give some of our listeners some hope now. I always talk about, I visited a town in the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, and the town is called Haguenau. And people don't grasp this nowadays. If we could go back in a time machine, 70 years ago, people don't grasp how much the French and the Germans hated each other. This town Haguenau switched sides 13 times in a span of about 500 years. And if you go to the churches in Haguenau now, there are still bullet holes in the bricks. You can see them. Yet now in the modern world, the French and the Germans have it sounds, again, silly talking about it, but they found a way to live in peace. What could the Palestinian territories be? Gaza's got beautiful beaches. It could be a hub for financial services. It could be a hub for importing and exporting. If only Hamas would be done with. If only, somehow we could move on and we could have a world where both regions prosper. Tell us what you think, the Palestinian territories could be if Hamas was no longer in power.
First thing to note is that the Palestinians have the highest per capita advanced degrees in the Arab world. So this is a very talented, educated people. Secondly, if you look at Palestinians living outside of the region, they're consistently successful. Um, I I gave a speech in Gaza at the beginning of 2005 after then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had announced that he was going to withdraw from Gaza 100%, which he did, by the way. So this was before he'd done it. And in the speech, and by the way, unbeknownst to me, until I got there, most of the leadership of Hamas, including one of its founders, were in the audience.
Wow.
And I didn't anticipate that, but they were there. It was a couple hundred people. And I said, Palestinians have never been able to shape their own future. In 1948, basically, the Arabs said, we'll take care of it. And Yasser Arafat, when we were at Camp David in the summer of 2000, said to me he wanted to go to the original Camp David summit, but the Soviets and the Syrians prevented him. So I said, look, this time the Israelis are getting out, and you turn Gaza into Singapore, not only will the international community say, gee, if it works this way, let's apply to the West Bank as well, but so will the Israeli public. But if you turn Gaza into a platform for attacks against Israel, who's going to say, let's take that failed model? Now, Hamas, when Israel withdrew, they kept carrying out attacks against Israel after Israel withdrew, including one of the most striking things. Israel had 6 crossing points from Israel into Gaza. There's one crossing point, Rafah, from Egypt into Gaza. The Egyptians kept that one closed. The Israelis, these 6 crossing points were the lifeblood for trade and everything else. People working, commerce, and so forth, because there was no port there. And Hamas attacked the crossing points after Israel withdrew. The crossing points were not a favor that was being done to Israel. It was a lifeblood for the Palestinians living in Gaza. And they attacked these crossing points, so Israel reduced the number of crossing points from 6 to 2. This is after they got out. Israel didn't put a blockade on Gaza for the first 20 months after they withdrew. Only when Hamas carried out a coup and took over in June of 2007 did they do that. So my answer to your question is, we haven't seen the Palestinians allowed to sort of flourish that way in Gaza. With Hamas, there's a potential. I would say, look, in the West Bank too, you have a Palestinian Authority. Obviously, it does face controls by the Israelis, but it also there's a lot of autonomy that it has been granted, but it's produced a corrupt government with terrible governance. So, if you had reform within the PA, and you had, by the way, you had 5 years when Salam Fayyad was an empowered prime minister and he cleaned things up, and you began to see things improve. Palestinians are a capable, industrious, educated people. If given half a chance with a decent leadership, they can flourish.
And you think
that's
about
what we should hope for.
You think about the money and the investments and the sense of relief that the international community would provide if that region could finally achieve peace, right? I mean, the leaders would go down in the history books as, people of profound statesmanship, and the investments that would flow in from the United States, from Israel, from everywhere, if the leaders of the two territories would just accept the international will, I would describe it, to have peace in that region.
Look, they have. I accept that Palestinians have national aspirations, and those need to be addressed. In the case of Hamas, they really don't have national aspirations. They are kind of an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. They see themselves as part of the larger Muslim community. They don't really respect borders, and they certainly view all of what is Israel as an Islamic trust. So they won't concede even a millimeter. And the only way to deal with them, given their behavior, is basically to destroy their military wherewithal and ensure that they can no longer control Gaza. That can give Palestinians in Gaza a future. In the aftermath of that, there needs to be a larger push to the Palestinian issue. within Israel, Israel is going to have to confront something that they haven't done. They really have never had a debate about what their relationship with Palestinians should be. When Rabin and Peres did Oslo, they basically made the decision to do it. There wasn't a debate as much as there was a decision. When Ariel Sharon withdrew from Gaza, again, he made a decision. There was opposition to Oslo. There was opposition to this decision, but there wasn't really a debate. The second Intifada had killed the peace camp in Israel. Now, when this is over, there needs to be a debate about what the relationship needs to be. And I say that because, in the shock and the trauma that October 7th represents within Israel, means you're not going to have that right now. You have to get beyond this. Israelis need to sort of process what happened, but they will. There'll be a political reckoning, and there'll be a debate. And there'll be two schools of thought in that debate. One school of thought will be, this just proves that we can't have a Palestinian state because you could get a Hamas-like group in control, and then we'll face these constant threats. And there'll be another school of thought that says, okay, we've defeated Hamas, and it's an illusion to think that we can control the Palestinians on our terms forever. And that won't radicalize Palestinians and produce successors to Hamas. But that's a debate that Israelis need to have. And it's not one that can be imported from here. It's one that they will thrash out. And the one thing we know is Israel is a democracy. We saw actually 40 weeks of demonstrations by Israelis who interpreted the judicial overhaul plan as a threat to democracy, and the depth of their commitment to it was evidenced by this. Well, they will have a debate. They're a democracy, and they will thrash us out. And, my expectation is they will come to the conclusion that they have to find a way to live with the Palestinians, and it can't be a case where they're controlling them.
Well, of course, we're talking about the so-called two-state solution, and what I'm seeing lately is continued murmurs, I guess I would describe it, or maybe a little bit of resuscitated vitality for the so-called three-state solution, and I want to. Well, maybe I can ask you to explain to our listeners the so-called three-state solution in the 1950s and how it was tried and why it failed.
Well, I'm not sure there was a three-state solution that was tried in the 1950s. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
Oh, yeah, and I know that the three-state solution means different things to different people. Nowadays, some people refer to the three-state solution as Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel as the three states. But in the 1950s context, it was always explained to me, this was when, for a brief period of time, Jordan wanted to take the West Bank into Jordanian control, and it did. And Egypt wanted to take Gaza into Egyptian control, and it did. And so the three states, of course, were Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. And actually, it was the Arab world that rejected that said, no, rather than absorbing the Palestinian populations in those regions into these other states, they must be absorbed into Israel, or Israel must cease to exist. And what I've started to see is some commentators, I think I read an op-ed a couple weeks after the October 7th attacks, where they said we should start considering this again. Rather than making Israel the guarantor of peace in these two Palestinian territories, we must involve Jordan and Egypt more. And to me, I think I'm a neophyte, of course. But to me, there is some appeal to that. And please explain.
Look, all right. So, Egypt did absorb Gaza after 48. After 67, it didn't want Gaza. Jordan, what was known as Transjordan, because it was only on the east bank of the Jordan River, became Jordan because in the 48 war, it was able to take it over. Now, it lost it in the 67 war. King Hussein, for a long period of time, retained connections to it. And go back to the Reagan plan. The Reagan plan in 1982, it was ended up being stillborn, but it called for a Palestinian entity in association with Jordan. I do think that any two-state outcome, I mean, three states is not realistic. I mean, Gaza is not a kind of genuinely independent entity, and is unlikely to be so. And also, Palestinians see themselves as part of something connected to the West Bank, not apart from it. So the question is not that you can't have the two states, but what is the role of Egypt as it relates to security uh, and with regard to Gaza, and what is the role of Jordan as it might relate to security, or are there confederal arrangements that might be possible? I mean, the key has always been how do you reconcile Palestinian national aspirations with Israeli security needs? That's always been the key, and it remains the key. And obviously, for Israelis today, their sense of security has been shaken, and that will have to be reestablished. And if you are to negotiate any kind of outcome, that's an outcome that's going to have to take account of Israel's security needs, not just in a kind of abstract way, but in a very practical, tangible way. And it probably has to be something that's phased in over a good period of time. The arrangements have to be able to prove themselves. Israel has to be able to defend itself by itself as a critical measure. These are all the things that would go into an eventual two-state outcome. And the notion of independence and sovereignty, you look at countries in the European Union, they haven't given up their sense of independence and national identity, but they also cede some of their sovereignty to this larger kind of unit. So the concept of sovereignty is something that also can be defined in multiple ways. And I think when we deal with a two-state solution at some point, you have to reconcile what I said. What are Israeli security needs with what are Palestinian needs to have independence and fulfill a sense of national aspiration?
Yeah, it's fascinating because I mean, obviously, if I were the leaders of Jordan and Egypt, of course, on one hand, I do sense that we have seen tremendous maturity from the Arab states in the Middle East overall, from Morocco to Saudi Arabia. We've seen tremendous maturity in the last 10 years and a willingness to normalize relations with Israel and to understand that peace and prosperity are the way to go rather than continued warfare. But at the same time, I understand why Jordan and Egypt don't want to become the guarantors for peace. But still, as an internal optimist, I would hope that at some point there would be a way for the international community to get them more involved, because symbolically it is much more easy, I think, for the international community and for the people some of the people marching the streets when it is people of the Muslim faith working together. Whereas right now, in the current situation with Israel's having to stand alone and be the guarantor of peace in the region, it's very easy to become a target, right? It's very, very easy for them for people in the Palestinian territories to say, well, gee, these are the people who are guaranteeing peace, and we hate police, and therefore, this and that. Whereas if there were Egyptian police officers who somehow or somehow, the Egyptian military was more involved in Gaza, it would be different.
Look, I think that one can create a set of security arrangements that you anchor their security in a way where Egypt and Jordan would have a role. It doesn't mean there isn't a Palestinian role, but they would have a role as well. But this is not something that's on the horizon right now.
Yeah.
First, you have to get this over. Then you have to, you're going to have to see a Palestinian leadership emerge that also makes it clear it's committed to peace and not violence. And as I said before, I think we're going to see a different Israeli government at some point, just because what happened on October 7th was the darkest day in Israel's history.
And I know we have time for just one more question. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to model this war a bit. There's a lot of curiosity out there. How long will the war last? What will the denouement be? maybe give us perhaps three different outcomes. This is sort of an opportunity to
Well,
model and simulate intelligence agency
yeah,
style for our listeners.
I'll simply say the following. Um, this war will end when Hamas is no longer capable of controlling Gaza. And then the critical challenges for afterwards are going to be Israel will obviously not want to stay there and shouldn't stay there, but it can't withdraw until there is something to fill the vacuum. It will not be the Palestinian Authority. It is too weak and it doesn't have enough legitimacy right now. It itself needs to be revitalized and reformed. We need some kind of international administration, but with Palestinian technocrats who help run it. We need some kind of regional and international force to ensure security, and we need a massive reconstruction effort that will ensure that the materials go for their intended purpose, and that everything is modeled on the basis of demilitarization to reconstruction. That will create a different Gaza, and that will create a different future for Palestinians not only there, but set in motion what could be something larger between Israelis and Palestinians.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Captain's
Okay.
Table. Our guest has been Ambassador Dennis Ross. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ross.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
This is the Captain's Table. I'm Mike Gotto. I've been your guest host today, and we are very appreciative for our guest, Ambassador Dennis Ross, for helping us make sense of the current conflict in Israel and Gaza.